Olá, bem-vinda a mais uma mesa da Feira Preta. É uma alegria ter essa conversa. A gente vai falar sobre um tema que é super caro para nós: política, direitos humanos, racismo e o mundo contemporâneo. Essa mesa é uma parceria com o British Council, uma organização internacional do Reino Unido para relações culturais e oportunidades educacionais, e está apoiando a participação dos nossos convidados britânicos e de outros lugares do mundo também. Hoje a gente vai conversar com a Penny e com o Douglas Belchior, e eu vou começar apresentando os nossos convidados. Bem-vindos, bem-vindo Douglas, bem-vinda Penny.
Olá.
Thank you.
A Penny Wangari-Jones, ela é ativista antirracismo, organizadora e diretora da Racial Justice Network. Ela atualmente está fazendo um doutorado na University of Manchester. Ela nasceu e foi criada no Quênia. Suas experiências de discriminação e racismo, depois de migrar para o Reino Unido, se tornaram um catalisador para sua luta pela justiça racial. Durante 12 anos, ela esteve envolvida no trabalho com comunidades marginalizadas. E ela está empenhada em entender como o colonialismo tem e continua a impactar as vidas dos negros, pardos, pessoas de cor, no sul global, quanto Reino Unido, que ela se dedica a abordar em seu trabalho. O Douglas Belchior é professor de História, fundador da Uneafro Brasil, articulador de projetos do Fundo Brasil de Direitos Humanos. Para a gente é uma representação dos movimentos negros no Brasil e é uma voz no momento contemporâneo sobre o que acontece no Brasil relacionado às questões raciais. Bem-vindos.
Muito obrigada pelo convite.
Thank you for having us.
Bem-vinda, Penny. Você pode contar um pouco mais sobre a sua trajetória?
Yeah, so the organization is based in the north of England, which means there's less Black people in the north of England, and also the experiences of racism are somewhat higher, as well as the resources to combat racism are less. So the fight and to try and mobilize and organize with Black communities and brown communities and communities who've migrated is a little bit tougher, but it's been a good cause, as an organization. So we have race at the center of our work, and then how race intersects with other oppressions and identities like class, like gender, like migration, like disability, like sexual orientation. And we feel that this has been one of our key strengths, because most organizations who organize on these strands tend to do it separately, but don't necessarily do the intersections as I've explained them. So we've been able to perhaps work with communities who are less likely to engage with us because we're able to see issues on multiple angles. And this also goes for the climate, because so we're involved in a climate movement, but we're asking people to look beyond climate and understand how colonial legacies and legacies of enslavement of people. By doing that, we've been able to build a really wholesome way of working with communities who are marginalized, but also build with them, because the people power element of really focusing and acknowledging the power is with the people is what's turned things the other way. So we see or understand what people talk about oppression Olympics, which is where one level of oppression is competing against another. and instead of working collaboratively to move forward. So what we are able to do by working intersectionally or across in this way, we center the most marginalized groups. And this, for example, somebody who's gay and has mental health issues and Black and unemployed, we are able to work from that point, which means we do not leave anybody behind. And because of that, we've been able to really push forward, including people who've migrated, because when people migrate to the UK, they have very little rights or protections, and therefore are left to or by themselves. I think I shared my journey of migrating to the UK and my own experiences of policing, of lacking services because as I was told. So this work emerged out of my own personal experience, as was said in the introduction, of migrating to the UK and facing some not very nice experiences because I was Black and because I was a migrant. So I initially started off really with the police, or because of the over-policing, but also the migration policies. And the migration policies is one that is one of the most, for the people we work with, the most overwhelming things, because there are protections that people have because of where they've come from, or lack because of where they've come from. So the level of injustice, the level of discrimination is on almost another par. So in my experience within this work, I talk about an apartheid. And this is because if you're a migrant, you're treated one way and you have one set of rules. And then if you're a citizen of this country, you're treated differently. Bear in mind, people who are Black and have been born and bred here, they still face discrimination regardless of their citizenship. So the way this work has come out has been as majority Black and brown communities, as we say here. I don't know what the word or the equivalent is in Brazil, but people are treated differently because of that. So the idea to focus on race and have race at the core of our work, and then work with how it intersects with other oppressions and identities, was very intentional, because it meant we were no longer sugarcoating, but we're doing what Angela Davis talks about, being radical, addressing the source from the root. So, and we're able to build power from those bases. So people who are working, for example, on LGBT issues, people who are working on gender issues, people who are working on class issues or disability, we're able to really bring them forward to understand that the problem we have, and to stop infighting, the problem we have is a system which is at the top of us. And what we need to do is work together to overturn that. And that's been really successful, because in a way, what we call the oppression Olympics, of one community saying, I'm more oppressed than this one and I'm more oppressed than another, we are able to work together in that way, work collaboratively and in solidarity. We're also able to understand anti-Blackness, because for all of these oppressions, the level of anti-Blackness, wherever you are, in whatever part of the world you are in, means you center the most marginalized person. So somebody who's Black, or a woman who has, or who's a single mother, who's unemployed, their level of oppression or the barriers that they face are very different from somebody who doesn't have some of those combined identities. And then we take it all the way back to colonial legacies. So we chose and we pushed the organization to address colonial legacies as well as enslavement, because what we see right now, whether we're migrating, whether it's the policies that are created, they are created with the whole idea of excluding Black, excluding people of color, excluding migrant communities, even though the wealth in this country and most of the other Western countries actually comes from exploitation and plunder of those colonies back whenever they did it, but also the fact that we're still connected and tied to contracts, to policies that were created back then. That means it's harder for Black communities or former colonies to shake off and stand up for themselves. So we connect this, or the fact that we have this as a core of our work means we're able to understand why communities who are facing climate damage are having to run to this country as economic migrants, because they haven't got the resources in their countries to deal with. They are also impacted by the divide and rule tactics that were started during colonialism. It's not so much about guilt or shaming people, it's about moving forward to understand that history and to understand that history and think, how do we build a better world right now as we are? And it's people to use whatever privileges they have, whether it's education, whether it's having resources like finances, whether it's positions that they hold in society. It's asking people to utilize that privilege to better for those who are marginalized. And that's mainly the core of our work. So we work predominantly with Black and Brown communities. 80% of our work is with those communities. And then the 20% with white communities, because we believe that they benefit from this system, and the battle to fight or stop or dismantle white supremacy should not just be left to Black communities by themselves. And the people who we work with are people who choose to come and join us, as opposed to forced to come and join us. And that's how we've managed to turn things and build all the projects that we have. And this includes international projects, because we've done a lot of decolonizing work in Kenya, and here I am working and talking to you in Brazil. So the idea of seeing beyond the borders has been a key strength, because we have to learn from others, but also share our resources with others as well. So that's our trajectory.
Uau! Que trajetória bonita. Obrigada. Douglas, conta pra gente um pouquinho da sua trajetória.
Muito obrigada, Pri. Bom, eu sou professor de História, né, formado em História pela PUC de São Paulo. Sou nascido e criado na Zona Leste de São Paulo, é um território negro, um bairro negro na cidade de São Paulo. No Brasil existe a tendência em não se exercitar ou afirmar o elemento racial que caracteriza as periferias, os territórios no país. Então, existe toda uma conceituação genérica. Então, embora sejamos um país de maioria negra e os bairros sejam ocupados, os bairros pobres, por uma maioria negra, a gente não chama assim aqui, né? Não é habitual utilizar esse conceito de bairro negro, bairro de maioria negra. Nós chamamos de periferia. É uma forma de generalizar e de apagar o elemento racial como um caracterizador, né, da nossa própria identidade. Eu tenho uma história de militância, de atuação e ativismo dentro da minha casa. Minha mãe foi uma ativista dentro da Igreja Católica, né? E o primeiro contato que eu tenho com a luta política é por esse caminho. Em seguida, na escola, no movimento estudantil, em escola pública, e em seguida eu conheço o movimento de cursinhos populares, o movimento de educação popular voltado para a comunidade negra. Isso há 22 anos atrás. E aí eu consigo conciliar dois elementos que me motivavam demais. O primeiro era que eu, criado numa família religiosa, tinha na questão religiosa algo importante, né, para minha formação. E eu então me encontrei com uma organização de luta contra o racismo e que ao mesmo tempo era vinculada à igreja, que era na época a Educafro, liderada por um frade franciscano. Aquilo me apaixonou e me levou a me dedicar muito ao trabalho de cursinho popular. Nós organizamos nos territórios negros espaços educacionais alternativos que são compostos por professores voluntários, professores negros e professores brancos, com o intuito de atender aquela comunidade, de oferecer reforço escolar e de fazer mobilização comunitária e luta política por acesso à universidade, como um direito. A universidade no Brasil nunca foi um direito dos pobres, sempre foi um privilégio dos brancos e dos ricos, né? O movimento social negro sempre denunciou e sempre lutou por esse direito. Nos últimos anos, nos últimos 15 anos, houve avanços em políticas públicas, em políticas de acesso à universidade, que foram fruto, primeiro, da denúncia e da pressão política que o movimento negro sempre fez. E essa pauta, essa pressão política fez com que os governos progressistas do Partido dos Trabalhadores, primeiro com o Lula e depois com Dilma, intensificasse, aplicasse algumas políticas que eram reivindicações do movimento negro. A minha trajetória, ela tem muita relação com a geração que fez a luta política por direitos de cotas raciais e também conversa com a geração que foi beneficiada pelas políticas. Então, eu me considero como parte de uma geração de transição, né? Eu, ainda jovem, muito jovem, convivi com as lideranças negras, que foram grandes responsáveis pela luta política, por exemplo, por ação afirmativa, por cotas raciais nas universidades. Eu não cheguei a ser beneficiado por essas políticas. Eu, quando estudei na universidade, ainda não haviam essas políticas, mas eu convivi e continuo atuando muito com as pessoas, os jovens, as pessoas negras que foram beneficiadas pela política, por essas políticas de ação afirmativa, que são, na minha concepção, o grande legado que os governos progressistas deixaram. Se a gente olhar para os resultados e para quais foram as políticas que permaneceram, a gente vai perceber que, sem dúvida nenhuma, as políticas, as iniciativas governamentais que mais geraram resultados e permaneceram no tempo foram aquelas voltadas para a educação e para o acesso da população negra aos espaços educacionais. Então, a minha trajetória passa muito por essa história.
Sim, uma trajetória incrível também. Eu também fiz parte dos movimentos católicos. Eu acho que foi base para muitos brasileiros, né? Muitos brasileiros negros, inclusive. Penny e Douglas, com a morte do George Floyd, teve um boom do movimento Black Lives Matter no mundo. Muitas pessoas compartilhando, pelo menos aqui no Brasil. Mas eu queria saber, em essência, o que vocês acreditam que mudou, tanto na Inglaterra quanto no Brasil, em relação a essa unificação, né, do que vem acontecido no mundo, a violência policial, mas também das ações práticas depois disso.
So, for me, I feel like it was a very unique moment, and it's still unfortunate that it takes the death and the witnessing of a Black person for the world to stop and do what it did. I feel like with our work, because we've been doing and campaigning and talking about racism, racialization for quite a long time, and sometimes people don't believe that it exists, because if it's not within their view, it's not happening. So suddenly people are coming back and saying, oh, we didn't know that this happens. So there was a bit of a bitter side to it of, really, like, you really haven't known that racism exists, and where have you been? But on the other hand, that idea, that showing of the death of Black people, and I continue to say, when I see this, for me, I'm seeing a brother, I'm seeing a sister, I'm seeing an uncle, I'm seeing a relative. It's not just that detachment does not happen with a lot of us. So the level of trauma or re-traumatization, but also desensitization of what it means for Black people to die and be viewed or captured and shared images around the world. We still ask questions of whether we ever see white people who are dead, and the answer is possibly not in the news or anywhere. So we don't often see white people who are white who are dead, or their bodies or displayed in that manner. And we've been also talking about this. For example, the Mediterranean, people who are running to Europe because of, again, the conditions I mentioned before, to do with colonial legacies, and dying on the Mediterranean, and the bodies floating on the Mediterranean or on the sand, and people take pictures and they share those. So there is one element of what does it mean for us to see our brothers, our sisters, our relatives displayed like that. But on the positive side, and this I feel it only happened also because of COVID, there was a real uproar this time, and the protest went international. I still feel like there's a big part of, for example, Black Lives Matter being seen or able to embrace a lot of what we're talking about, including internationalism. So we do not see Black Lives Matter just from an angle of when you're in a majority white country. We have countries like Kenya, or the former colonized countries, who Black people are still dying at the hands of the police, but actually the police are Black, the leaders are Black. So the question is, Black Lives Matter being able to see this, which is why we're talking about our work around colonial legacies and enslavement legacies. It shows how that poison that started from white supremacy got in and continues to manifest itself in different forms. So we should be able to understand Black Lives Matter from a perspective of a majority Black country. And I know, for example, in Brazil, and this has been, I've been lucky enough to attend 2 times and meet mothers of Black children who die in the favelas and wherever else. So the concept of Black Lives Matter perhaps needs to be spread in a way where it embraces all of that. So, but coming to the positive of what we've seen this time is an ability for Black Lives Matter in the UK to see it from different angles. So they were talking about police dying at the hands of the police, but we're also talking about dying at the hands of migration policies. Because the policies we have, one of them called the hostile environment policy, which was created to make the environment very hostile for people who've migrated here. We have people dying in the detention centers, people dying whilst they're being deported, people starving in their homes, like a recent mother who was found with a child who died and nobody knew how long they died. So we have similar policies here, even though the police do not have guns in the same way. Their response to Black people is very different to other responses. So Black Lives Matter were able to talk about internationalism, to talk about people in detention centers, people being forcefully removed from this country, people who are from the trans community who are abused at the hands of the police. So this time I saw an ability to see from more angles than just one angle of policing and Black people. For us as an organization, and I think this is one I want to perhaps end on, was also recognizing the ability this time for white people to really look at themselves. Because in other protests that we've seen before, it's usually the Black people who go out, the people who are oppressed, who are saying this is not fair, and the rest become spectators. And it's not their problem because they consider themselves not to be racist. But this time there was the push of around bystanders, and also being complacent was so big that we saw a huge turn of white people who are, first of all, asking themselves how they've participated in extending white supremacy, but also what can they do to help or to change the structures. So we wrote an article literally a few days after the murder of George Floyd, asking people to organize themselves, to start small trainings, to do something about it rather than just do stuff on Twitter. We put this article out, and what happened, because people came to the organization saying, what can they do? This is white people, how can they get involved in our campaigns? And the suggestion was, we just, as a project, we have a course designed for white people and delivered by white people who are mentored under the organization. And this course has been running now for 2 years. So when these huge numbers of people started emailing the organization, what I asked these course facilitators is to help, because all these people cannot just run into our campaigns, because that also changes the dynamic. So the course is usually like 20 hours. So the suggestion was to do a shorter course, a taster course for white people, for them to then go and get involved in campaigns elsewhere. So weirdly, we put this call out, and within 10 days, we had over 1,000 white people register on the course. Obviously, we didn't have the resources for that kind of number. So what we've done instead, we've delivered webinars to about 600 people. And the idea for this course is really for people to start unpicking and really looking at themselves, and not white supremacy, white power, white fragility, white everything. And then the next step of it is to really apply that knowledge. So it's not to sit and learn and think, I don't want to be seen as racist, as what, not about how they perform themselves around Black issues. So being able to understand whiteness as it exists in this world right now, and being able to participate in anti-racism in very open and formidable ways. And so we've done this course. We plan to do more. But for me, that was one of the unique things about this Black Lives Matter issue, that the number of people who are willing to look at themselves. And I know what we are doing, whether it's with the 600 or all the other people that we've impacted, if they're able to understand and support anti-racism wherever they are, I think the world is definitely going to be a better place. Because for all of the work that we've done before, some of the resistance comes from white liberals who claim things are not racism, who create these policies. And I think the more we have people who understand it, the better it gets. So in a nutshell, it wasn't a good situation, and it's sad because yes, we have George Floyd, so we have Breonna Taylor, but we truly hope and believe that their deaths will not go in vain. And for those of us who are carrying the banner of anti-racism, to continue and to build with others in this approach of internationalism, seeing the interconnectedness and that intersectional approach.
Obrigada, Penny. Douglas, a provocação também vai para você.
Sim, obrigada. Bom, esse ano ficará marcado para a história como o ano da pandemia do coronavírus e os danos causados por ela no mundo. No Brasil não foi diferente. É uma pandemia que paralisou o planeta. O único fenômeno capaz de atravessar a pandemia foi os protestos por conta da violência racial. Isso não é uma coisa pequena. O único fenômeno capaz de atravessar uma pandemia que paralisou o planeta foi o debate racial. A partir do que acontece nos Estados Unidos, com George Floyd, e daí para o mundo todo. E quando esse debate, a partir do assassinato brutal de George Floyd, chega no Brasil, ele encontra um contexto. Além do contexto da pandemia, que também afetava drasticamente o Brasil, que impunha naquele momento um estado de atenção por parte dos governos, que impunha naquele momento o distanciamento social como uma regra geral. Além do contexto da pandemia, o debate sobre racismo chega no Brasil no momento em que a classe média está manifestando preocupação com a democracia brasileira, por conta dos traços explícitos autoritários, por conta do traço autoritário explícito do governo Bolsonaro, que passou a atingir também a classe média, a classe artística, os intelectuais, os jornalistas brancos, que nunca antes haviam se preocupado com o debate racial. Então existia um debate no Brasil sobre a importância de defender a democracia e uma classe média pousando de progressista, se colocando como progressista. Quando acontece esse evento nos Estados Unidos e que as manifestações tomam as ruas e a imprensa começa a cobrir esse fato, isso gera um constrangimento, porque, afinal de contas, uma classe média progressista não pode ser alheia ao que está acontecendo nos Estados Unidos, tem que se manifestar em relação a isso. Mas como é que ela vai se manifestar em relação a isso, ao que acontece enquanto violência racial fora do Brasil, se ela é míope, cega, se ela ignora a violência racial dentro de casa, dentro do próprio país? Então isso impôs um constrangimento, e a classe média brasileira e a grande imprensa brasileira foi obrigada, foi constrangida a pautar esse debate na sociedade. Isso não começa do zero. O debate sobre racismo provocado pelo assassinato brutal de George Floyd encontra no Brasil um contexto em que o movimento negro está muito organizado, em que pessoas negras, frutos da luta do movimento negro, estão ocupando lugares estratégicos. Estão também na universidade, formaram seus intelectuais, ocupam lugares importantes e estratégicos na grande imprensa, têm voz pública em importantes jornais. Então, diferente do que aconteceu em outros momentos, o movimento negro brasileiro está muito fortalecido. E há, Penny, uma comparação que se faz muito, o tempo todo no Brasil, quando acontecem manifestações antirracistas ou mobilizações do movimento negro nos Estados Unidos, uma comparação com o movimento negro brasileiro, como se aqui não houvesse movimento negro. Ora, por que o movimento negro nos Estados Unidos é tão ativo, é tão pujante, ocupa as ruas e no Brasil não? Então vem essa provocação para nós. E a nossa resposta é que, na verdade, não há uma diferença tão grande assim do ponto de vista da mobilização, da organização, da disposição do movimento negro brasileiro em relação ao movimento negro norte-americano. O que há é uma diferença na postura dos brancos, na postura das elites, na postura da cobertura da mídia em relação ao tema. Aí sim há diferença. Há uma diferença em relação à sensibilidade social para o tema, que mobiliza muito mais nos Estados Unidos do que aqui. Aqui é um fenômeno absolutamente novo. A classe média branca, os artistas, os intelectuais brancos se posicionarem contra o racismo. É a primeira vez que isso acontece no país, na história do Brasil. É a primeira vez. Então, e aí Penny faz uma pergunta que cabe para nós também. Aonde é que estavam essas pessoas até meses atrás, quando o movimento negro brasileiro sempre denunciou, Priscila? É um fenômeno absolutamente novo o fato de a classe média, intelectuais, artistas, escritores, jornalistas se posicionarem publicamente contra o racismo. Porque foi uma imposição do movimento negro. uma pressão política do movimento negro que constrangeu esse setor da sociedade e fez com que esse tema se tornasse um tema no debate público nacional. Então, esse é um ano que fica marcado também para a história como o ano em que a gente mais aprofunda o debate público sobre racismo no Brasil. E nós, movimento negro, que sempre lutamos, que sempre denunciamos, sem a sensibilidade, sem os ouvidos, sem os olhares da opinião pública, nós que sempre pregamos no deserto. A denúncia do genocídio, a denúncia da violência contra as mulheres negras. Isso é uma recorrência. O movimento negro brasileiro, o povo negro brasileiro, ocupa as ruas a cada assassinato de jovem negro. A gente tem, Penny, uma cobertura preconceituosa e criminalizante das ações que o movimento negro faz para denunciar o racismo. Enquanto a mídia brasileira chama as mobilizações nos Estados Unidos de mobilizações contra o racismo, chama de manifestante quem ocupa a rua, no Brasil, quando comunidades pobres ocupam as ruas, nas periferias de São Paulo, do Rio de Janeiro, do Recife, coloca fogo em ônibus, travam as avenidas, a mídia brasileira chama de criminosos, de bandidos. Então, o olhar das elites, a sensibilidade dos setores médios é que é muito menor. Nós encaramos como uma grande vitória do movimento negro a gente ter pautado a questão racial no Brasil esse ano. Obviamente provocado, tendo como catalisador o que aconteceu com George Floyd, sem dúvida, sem dúvida. Porque, infelizmente, o traço colonizado que nos caracteriza, né, faz com que a gente funcione muito em função do que acontece fora do Brasil. Quer dizer, todo o apelo que o movimento negro fez, historicamente, e as mortes que acontecem no Brasil, a cada 23 minutos, um jovem negro brutalmente assassinado, não foi suficiente para comover a classe média brasileira. Precisou que acontecesse uma situação brutal e uma rebelião contra essa brutalidade nos Estados Unidos para que isso comovesse a classe média brasileira. Para nós de movimento negro, para nós que organizamos a Feira Preta, a Uneafro está organizada em 40 bairros, organizando o povo para lutar por direitos, oferecendo trabalho de educação e denunciando o racismo. E isso nunca foi suficiente para mobilizar a atenção pública. Então a gente está vivendo esse momento no Brasil de efervescência. Existe no Brasil, Penny, e quero muito conversar com você sobre isso, a organização da nossa Black Lives Matter brasileira, que é a Coalizão Negra por Direitos. É uma grande aliança nacional do movimento negro brasileiro em luta pelos nossos direitos, já há 2 anos sendo construída. No debate, quando chega o debate sobre o racismo e a morte de George Floyd no Brasil, nós estamos discutindo democracia e nós, então, construímos um manifesto que conversa com a classe média e que chama a atenção, a responsabilidade dos brancos, da branquitude, com um manifesto com o título "Enquanto houver racismo, não haverá democracia". Não é possível pensar um país que seja atravessado pelo racismo que consiga alcançar a justiça. E para nós só é possível um futuro justo, equilibrado, se a gente enfrentar o racismo com a importância que ele tem na nossa sociedade.
Penny, eu acho que você teve algumas descobertas sobre como reverbera o movimento Black Lives Matter aqui no Brasil, mas também como a gente já está há bastante tempo nesse processo. Você quer comentar alguma coisa em relação ao que você ouviu do Douglas?
I think, again, because I sit in 3 places, so I have comrades and family in Kenya who are also fighting and pushing back about what they're experiencing. As I listen to Douglas, I hear a lot of what he's just said, and I also completely agree that it's part of the imperialism that you've been saying what you've been saying and nobody's paying attention, and because it's coming from the US, they're now paying attention. And it's really sad that that is the case, because I feel similarly, we've been talking about racism here for quite a long time, and because of coming from that point, that some people have paid attention, and that's why I was saying it's kind of mixed feelings, of on one hand feeling frustrated, but on the other hand thinking, let's go with what we've got, let's utilize this moment and push hard with what we have. I agree around classism or political literacy is so important, because those, as I said, some of what I feel has been some of the challenges within our action or activism has been the people, the middle classes, the elite, who do not see what we see, who are not experiencing on the ground and hearing the direct stories of oppressions and struggle from the people. So I think what you were saying there around what you're doing, and I'm really impressed to hear that you know 40 neighborhoods, Uneafro. I'd like to really hear and come across or even engage with the manifesto. I hear what you're doing with the Uneafro and the being in 40 neighborhoods, and I'm really impressed, because that in itself is people power. Yes, they might not have some of the resources, but that in itself might, even if you don't see the solution or the impact now or the outcome now, I'm sure in a few years there will be. I'm still saddened at what you said about 15 minutes. Somebody dies every 15 minutes, every 23 minutes. It's really sad to imagine that. And for me, as I said, one of our projects is internationalism. I'm continuing to work with organizations and individuals in Brazil. Right as of now, there's some coming to speak at our event next week. For me, that resource share and idea share, including some of the successes we've had and maybe the challenges we've had, I'd love to share that. Obviously, we have a language issue, but I'm also grateful for the technology that we have right now, that because I tend to write in English, I use Google Translate, and then I send a WhatsApp message, and then they send the same back to me. So we have technology now that we could share, because in terms of the experiences that we're having, they're very similar. And I also really heard what you said about your own personal journey of starting activism at home. For me, that's been one of the biggest drivers, because the more curious, I knew my family history as people who resisted the occupation of British occupation, but I did not know it as I know it now. Yeah, the fact that his mum was organizing in church. And I believe a lot of our activism and our fight for justice is nurtured at home or in the environments that we live in. What pushes us to action is a particular incident, but the nurturing of the fight and desire for justice is already in us. And I think the work that you're doing at Uneafro, I imagine, is impacting on so many people in a way that it'll go on for quite a long time. I was reflecting on my own personal journey of activism, because I say my activism was nurtured at home. I grew up in a house where we were allowed to say stuff as opposed to just be seen as children. I got into trouble a lot at school because I took that fight to school sometimes and told teachers when I think things were not right, but the nurturing was at home. And now that I'm doing my PhD, I've learned even more of my own family history of resistance to British occupation. So my grandfather and grandmother were one of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, so what is known as the Mau Mau. They were the uprisings in 1950s that led to independence. and these uprisings were led by peasants. They were not people, they were not the elite, they were ordinary people who took up arms to protect the land and defend the land and their rights. And obviously the people who benefited from that fight when Kenya got independence was the elite who were actually loyalists to the colonizers. But now, the reason I'm mentioning this now is seeing that history and how it's impacted on me and my family, but people around me, means I cannot just fight just on an individual level. I have to see it from multiple angles, but I have to connect internationally as well. So when we're challenging the education systems that's distorted, that does not tell us the true history, but also makes us feel less like inferior or inferiorizes us as Black people, we challenge that. We challenge migration policies. So maybe as an end note, I'm willing and happy to engage another time or outside of this space to learn from each other. Because I think we also now, I also acknowledge being in the global north as I am right now, I have some privileges that I know when I was there through the Fundadora and with the 100 women activists, I know we have resources here that, and I have protections here that some of the women and the people, whether it's from the Quilombos, whether it's in the Amazon, that they do not have. So I feel a duty to extend my hand constantly to people in other parts of the world.
Muito obrigada, Penny. Muito obrigada, Douglas. O tempo passou correndo. É um assunto tão caro e tão importante, mas eu acredito que a gente conseguiu compartilhar um pouco das nossas histórias. Então, agradeço imensamente, Douglas e Penny. Se vocês quiserem fazer suas considerações finais.
Bom, eu quero agradecer a oportunidade, Pri, dar parabéns ao trabalho da Feira Preta, que é incrível, que nos incentiva, né, ilumina o caminho e mobiliza tanta gente. Nós vivemos um momento muito especial no Brasil de organização, de levante da população negra, na sua, não só no resgate da sua autoestima, da sua identidade racial, mas na potencialização política do seu lugar no mundo. Isso é muito importante. A gente vive um momento eleitoral que eu espero que traga bons resultados. E essa conexão também na diáspora, essa conexão entre movimentos, iniciativas de pessoas negras no país, aqui no Brasil e fora do Brasil, é muito importante para nós. Penny, muito prazer em te conhecer. Espero que a gente possa continuar nessa conexão. Muito obrigado.
Yeah, muito obrigada. And I say the same thing. Thank you so much for organizing this space and for sharing these resources and also allowing to meet and hear from others. So yeah, thank you so much. And I hope to catch up with what you do in terms of the whole conference event. Thank you.
Muito obrigada. Você assistiu uma mesa com o Douglas Belchior e a Penny Wangari. E até a próxima mesa da Feira Preta. A gente tem 20 dias de festival, então vai de 20 de novembro a 10 de dezembro esse ano, com conteúdo completamente online. Quero agradecer a tradução da Eneida Sanches e até a próxima. Obrigada.